That dog didn't just bite me, it was sent. Unleashed like a weapon, fangs first, just because I dared to water my lawn while black. And as I lay bleeding on my own porch, the man who let it loose, Curtis Blake, stood grinning beer in hand like he'd just won a prize. Behind him, the HOA queen herself, Marjorie Laskin, watched from her window with her clipboard of rules, and her silence sharper than any blade. They wanted to put me in my place. But what they didn't know was, I've already fought one war. And this neighborhood, this would be my second. They say a man's home is his sanctuary, but that morning it felt more like a battlefield. I had just stepped out to water my begonias when the beast lunged. A massive German shepherd, eyes wild, teeth bared, snarling like a demon let loose from hell. It wasn't just a bite, it was a message, a warning, and as I lay on the ground, blood soaking through the leg of my jeans, I looked up through the blinding pane to see Curtis Blake. My neighbor smirking from his porch with a can of beer in one hand and no apology in the other. "Should have stayed inside, old man," he muttered, and turned his back on me like I wasn't worth the air between us. His dog, unrestrained, strutted back to his yard like he'd claimed his kill. And just like that, my body wasn't the only thing bleeding. My dignity, too, had been torn open. I'm Harold Dunbar, 71 years old, a decorated black veteran of the United States Marine Corps. I served 3 tours in Vietnam, took shrapnel to the ribs, buried brothers in foreign soil, and held the line for a country that didn't always hold me back. I didn't come home asking for glory or praise. I just wanted a small patch of peace in the sleepy suburb of Cedar Grove. A quiet place where I could tend my flowers, drink my morning coffee, and listen to Coltrane records until the sun dipped behind the maples. But even in retirement, I discovered that a uniform doesn't buy you respect when your skin makes you a target. Curtis wasn't always like this. When he first moved in next door with his loud truck, louder music, and a head full of entitlement, he kept his distance. I didn't mind. But after the HOA made me tear down my modest flagpole, said it was aesthetic obstruction, he started inching closer like a wolf, sniffing for weakness. It wasn't long before the slurs came wrapped in sarcasm. "Nice jungle out front, Harold. What's next? A spear rack." And now he'd unleashed his dog on me. I sat in the emergency room, leg bandaged and mind spiraling. The nurse looked apologetic. The doctor asked if I was sure it wasn't an accident. But they didn't see the way Curtis smiled. They didn't hear the click of the gate deliberately unlatched. They didn't live next to the kind of venom that dressed up as neighborly negligence. The police arrived eventually, took a statement, jotted notes, promised to look into it. But I could see the glaze in their eyes, the kind that said, not worth the paperwork. One of them even asked if I'd done anything to provoke the animal, as if existing on my own porch was provocation. But it wasn't just about the dog. This was about power, territory, about putting me in my place. I remember sitting in my kitchen that night, leg propped on a chair, lights dimmed, and everything still except the low hiss of my oxygen tank. My lungs never fully recovered from the war. My medals hung crooked on the wall, the weight of them somehow heavier than ever before. I reached for the old photo of my platoon black-white Latino brothers in arms, and I wondered if they'd look at me now and still see a fighter. The next morning, I tried to mow the lawn. Half the block drove past me like I was invisible. One of Curtis's friends, same shaved head, same venom in the eyes, slowed down just enough to throw a milkshake into my yard. "Maybe clean that up, hero," he laughed. And that was when I realized they weren't afraid of me, but they should be, because beneath the quiet man with the straw hat and garden gloves was a Marine who'd survived worse jungles than this. I didn't fight through rice paddies and mortar shells to be terrorized by a man-child and his mutt. I didn't bury friends so I could be buried alive in silence. No, this wasn't over. That night, I pulled out my old footlocker. Inside was everything they'd forgotten about me. My discharge papers, photos, citations, and an unopened envelope from a lawyer friend I'd met during the civil rights protests in '68. He always said, "Herald paper is power. Keep yours safe." I finally understood what he meant. The following day, I called the HOA. I asked for a meeting. They told me it was members only. I reminded them that I paid dues like everyone else. Silence. I asked about their dog ordinance. More silence. When I told them about the attack, they said they'd log it for review. That was the last straw. I reached out to Clara Morris, a single mother 2 streets over, whose son was ticketed for skateboarding on the sidewalk. I spoke to Mr. Lynn, who was fined for hanging red lanterns during Lunar New Year. I even sat down with old Ms. Patterson, who was ordered to remove her birdhouse because it attracted wildlife. We were a patchwork of the overlooked different colors, different stories, same enemy. Curtis thought I'd bleed quietly, that I'd retreat behind my white picket fence and learn my lesson. But he didn't know me. Didn't know that every time I heard his dog growl, it only made the fire inside me burn hotter. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about reclaiming the dignity stripped away from every veteran, every minority, every neighbor who'd ever been told, "You don't belong here." I didn't sleep that night. I wrote, I drafted. I remembered every detail, the noise, the laughter, the blood. And somewhere between the rage and the resolve, I found the start of something bigger than revenge. I found the seed of justice. And like any good gardener, I was ready to make it grow. The following week passed like molasses, slow, sticky, and thick with the kind of tension that curls behind curtains and lingers in the spaces between fence posts. Every time I stepped outside, I could feel the stares. Some were subtle. Most weren't. Curtis paraded his dog now, letting the beast roam off leash in the driveway, pretending to toss a tennis ball that always landed just shy of my yard. Easy boy, he'd smirk. Don't want another accident. He said it loud enough for the neighborhood to hear, but not quite loud enough to call it a threat. That's how people like him operated, just enough menace to make you flinch, but never enough to leave fingerprints. I tried to be the man my late wife Gloria always said I was: measured wise, slow to anger. But every time I limped past the hydrangeas we'd planted together, the wound on my leg flared like a reminder. Not just of the bite, but of what it meant. I wasn't Harold the gardener anymore. I was the angry black vet with a vendetta. They were already crafting the narrative quietly, like termites behind drywall. I began documenting everything. Curtis's dog running loose. The time he revved his truck's engine at 2 a.m. lights pointed straight into my bedroom window. The bag of dog feces I found hurled at my fence. I installed a camera. 2, actually. 1 pointed toward the street and 1 right at the line between our lawns. The day after I set them up, someone egged my mailbox. I went to the police again. This time, they told me they'd review the footage. No report was filed. I asked about pressing charges. Against a neighbor, one officer said with a shrug, "Might be tough." No clear intent. No intent, I thought. What's clearer than blood and a smirk? But I didn't argue. I just nodded. And I walked out of that station not as a victim, but as a man building a case. Back at home, I dug out a storage bin from the crawl space. Inside, wrapped in an old USMC blanket, were dozens of Gloria's handwritten letters. She used to write me when I was deployed every single week, sometimes every day. In one of them, dated August 1969, she wrote, "Don't ever let them shrink you, Harold. You are not small. Not then, not now, not ever." I wept reading it, and then I got to work. I called Clara again. She sounded cautious but curious. I told her everything about the dog, the silence, the looks. She sighed like someone who'd been waiting to finally be heard. "It's not just you, Harold," she said. "It's this whole place. They act like they're better than us because they've got lawn ornaments and bylaws." The next day she came over with cookies. She stayed 2 hours. That was the beginning. In a week, I'd spoken with over a dozen neighbors, some I hadn't said more than hello to in years. A pattern emerged. Mr. Lynn's lantern fine. Turned out he'd never received formal notice, just a violation letter slipped under his mat. Ms. Patterson's birdhouse. It was flagged by the same HOA member who approved her neighbor's patio fountain 2 weeks later. The HOA wasn't just enforcing rules, they were selectively enforcing them. And it didn't stop there. Clara shared minutes from a past HOA meeting she'd secretly recorded on her phone, where Curtis himself joked about weeding out the riffraff. Laughter followed, including from the HOA president Marjorie Laskin, a woman who wore pearls to mow her lawn, and once told me my lawn gnome was culturally off-putting. I listened to that recording 3 times. Then I hit record on my own voice. I told my story, every painful, humiliating moment of it. And I uploaded it to a private Facebook group for Cedar Grove residents. At first it got 2 likes, then 10, then 100. By nightfall, my inbox was flooded. People I hadn't spoken to in years. White, Black, Latino veterans, single parents, retirees reached out. Some with sympathy, others with their own stories. A pattern turned into a movement, but not everyone was pleased. Curtis knew. You could see it in how he stared at my camera every morning, middle finger raised with a beer in hand by 9 a.m. The HOA sent me a notice. "Your video constitutes defamatory material. Cease and desist or face legal action." I laughed, because for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid. That night, the unexpected happened. Around 3:13 a.m., my security camera caught footage of Curtis's dog again off-leash charging across my lawn. This time, the footage showed it lunging not at me, but at my American flag. The cloth tore, the pole snapped, and the dog ran back to its side of the yard, dragging the flag like a chew toy. Curtis stood in the shadows watching. He never moved to stop it. I posted the footage. No commentary, just the raw video. The next morning it had 12,000 views. That was the day everything changed. Reporters showed up. Local stations. Even a podcaster from Portland who covered neighborhood injustice. But the most powerful moment came when young Marcus Green, a 15-year-old from down the street, showed up at my door holding a small folded American flag. "My dad said you served. I just wanted to bring this to say thank you." I choked up. I saw in his eyes the kind of reverence I used to see in my platoon's faces when we saluted the colors. That flag wasn't just cloth. It was a promise, a belief in something better, even if the country hadn't always lived up to it. The HOA scrambled. They held a special meeting. They didn't invite me, but dozens of neighbors did. Outside, on my lawn, we set up chairs, speakers, a screen. We played the videos. We told our stories. And when the lights came down and the voices rose, we realized something staggering. We were the real community, not the bylaws, not the pearl necklaces or the clipped hedges, not the Curtis Blakes of the world, but us, the survivors, the overlooked, the fighters. In the quiet after the gathering, Clara looked at me and said, "What now?" I stared at the snapped flagpole still lying in the grass and replied, Now we fight back the right way, not with fists, with truth, with unity, with the one thing they feared most, visibility, because monsters like Curtis only thrive in the dark, and we were about to turn on every damn light in Cedar Grove. They came for me the next morning, not with torches, but with a clipboard. Marjorie Laskin, HOA president, flanked by 2 committee members in pressed khakis and expressions carved from stone. I was sipping my coffee on the porch when they approached, stepping around the broken flagpole like it was a fallen tree and not a symbol of their shame. Marjorie smiled a taut, weaponized smile that never reached her eyes. Mr. Dunbar, she said, as if my name tasted sour in her mouth, we're here on behalf of the HOA to formally request that you take down the video content in violation of community decorum. I didn't rise, didn't blink, just looked her in the eye and said, You mean the video of your neighbor's dog attacking a veteran and desecrating a flag? Her face tightened, but she didn't flinch. We're simply trying to maintain the harmony of our neighborhood, she replied. Your posts are attracting the wrong kind of attention. Good, I said. About time this place got some attention. Curtis watched from across the street, arms folded, dog-leashed for once, but barely. He spat on the sidewalk when our eyes met. The show was on. But I had no intention of backing down now. Not when the neighborhood had seen the truth. Not when kids were leaving thank you cards in my mailbox and strangers were sending emails with subject lines like, Semper Fi, sir. I stood slowly, cane in one hand, pride in the other. You see that lawn, I said, pointing to the patch of grass between our houses, the no-man's land, where Curtis's dog first lunged. That's not just grass. That's the line. And I'm done letting you cross it. Marjorie opened her mouth, then closed it again. She handed me a paper, a formal citation for public defamation of HOA officers. I laughed. Frame it for me, will you? I said, turning my back and stepping inside. That evening, the lawn became a battlefield of a different kind. Neighbors trickled in, Clara with her chocolate chip cookies again. Marcus and his dad with a fresh flag they bought together. Mr. Lynn with his homemade rice cakes and Ms. Patterson with her walker slowly but defiantly making her way to the circle of folding chairs we'd laid out. We weren't just gathering anymore. We were organizing. We called it the Cedar Grove Coalition, and I was its reluctant commander. Harold Clara said we should file a petition, get her out. I paused. Marjorie, she nodded. And Curtis, too. He's technically in violation of a dozen HOA rules. And there's precedent. I had to laugh. All these years. And now you're telling me bylaws might actually work for us. She grinned. Funny how they care about rules until they're the ones breaking them. So we drafted papers. Spoke to legal aid. Mr. Green Marcus's father knew a lawyer who specialized in HOA abuses. Turned out our little rebellion had teeth. The coalition grew fast. By the weekend, we had signatures from nearly 40 residents. I watched the panic set in like a slow fever. Curtis stopped pretending to ignore me. He started yelling instead. You think you're a hero, he shouted across his porch one evening. You're just an old man with a camera and a pity party. I said nothing. He didn't deserve my words. But Clara did. So did the others. That night we gathered in my garage and made signs. Not protest signs, pride signs. Ones that said, Justice has no age, veterans deserve respect, unity over uniformity. I hadn't painted anything since Gloria passed, but something about dipping that brush into bold red paint lit a fire I hadn't felt in years. The next morning, those signs lined our street, and it wasn't just us anymore. Even the realtor at the end of the block, the one who once told a black couple the HOA was strict about appearances, came by and nodded. "You're changing the game, Harold," she said. "About time." But the pushback came swiftly. The HOA issued blanket citations to everyone displaying signage. Curtis filmed himself ripping one out of the ground with a bat and posted it online claiming he was defending property values. The internet didn't take kindly to that. Veteran groups reposted my story. One of my old Marine buddies, Lieutenant Ray Tucker, found it and called me for the first time in a decade. "Damn, Dunbar," he said, voice thick with pride. "You always did know how to fight the right war." That night I couldn't sleep. I stood on the porch, eyes scanning the street, heart heavy with memory. I thought of Vietnam, of Foxhole 17, and the rain that never stopped, of Jimmy Tran and Big Lou, and the way we used to write letters to imaginary girls just to feel less alone. I thought of Gloria, her laughter, her stubbornness, the way she said my name like it meant something. And I thought of this moment, not with fear, but with the clarity of a soldier before the final push. This was my line in the lawn. This was my Tet offensive, and I wouldn't retreat. Not now. Not ever. I woke up to sirens faint, far off, but somehow close enough to make my heart jump the way it used to when mortars cracked through the night sky in Nam. It wasn't until I stepped onto the porch that I saw the smoke curling in the distance. It wasn't a house, thank God, but someone had set fire to the sign we'd posted at the entrance of Cedar Grove Community Not Control. Charred wood smoldered in the grass, and spray-painted across the sidewalk were 2 words in red, "Stay down." It wasn't just vandalism. It was a threat, and it was personal. I called Clara. She was already up. "Someone's playing dirty," she said, voice steady but low like a mother hiding fear from her children. I checked my security feed, nothing. They knew what they were doing, but I'd seen this before. Not the fire, not the graffiti. The tactic. Escalation. Intimidation. I'd seen it in the jungle. I'd seen it on the streets of Alabama when Gloria and I marched for voting rights in '65. When you started to win, they tried to remind you who they thought was in control. But we weren't the same scared people anymore. We were a coalition. Later that morning, I stood on the charred lawn with Marcus and his dad. "You know what we do now?" I asked. Marcus shook his head, eyes wide. "We rebuild it," I said. "And we build it bigger." By noon, there were more people than I'd ever seen gathered in Cedar Grove. Retirees with toolkits, teens with spray cans, the good kind, moms with folding chairs, babies on their hips, toddlers with juice boxes. They all came. And when we lifted the new sign, bright, bold, and carved in reclaimed cedar, they cheered like we'd just raised the flag at Iwo Jima. But not everyone clapped. Curtis was there too. On his lawn, arms crossed, dog pacing, watching like a snake in the grass. And behind him, Marjorie, in her white linen suit, clipboards in hand, surrounded by the remaining faithful of her little regime. She didn't come over, didn't speak, but she didn't need to, because that night the real ambush came. Around 7:48 p.m., I got a hand-delivered envelope. It was stamped urgent and carried by a private courier paid for, I'm sure, with HOA dues. Inside, a lawsuit filed in civil court, claiming I had defamed Curtis Blake, incited community unrest, and violated Cedar Grove's Mutual Conduct Clause. It was 11 pages of gaslighting and legalese. But one sentence jumped off the page like a punch. "Mr. Dunbar's conduct has caused irreparable harm to the emotional and economic well-being of his neighbors." I sat down, paper shaking in my hand. emotional harm, economic well-being. I bled on my lawn. I was the one. Targeted, mocked, harassed. And now I was the villain. I didn't sleep that night, but I didn't cry either. I strategized. The next day, we held an emergency coalition meeting. The garage was packed, people standing shoulder-to-shoulder, voices tight with anger. "We'll fundraise," Clara said. "I know someone who can build a GoFundMe page." Mr. Lin offered to cover filing fees. Miss Patterson raised her hand and said, "I got $200 under my mattress I haven't touched since 1983. If that man gets to sue, so do we." We laughed. But not long, because the next item on our agenda wasn't funny. Retaliation had begun. Clara received a letter saying her backyard swing set was an unapproved structure. Mr. Lin got cited for excessively loud wind chimes. Even little Marcus got threatened with a fine for operating a motorized vehicle, his electric scooter. They were coming for us one by one. The HOA wasn't just defending Curtis. They were weaponizing the rules to silence the movement. But I knew their weakness now. They needed darkness. They thrived on quiet, and I had light. So I called the local news station again. This time, they came with cameras. I stood on my porch and told them everything. The bite, the threat, the lawsuit, the silence of those sworn to uphold community peace. And I ended with this. I didn't spend 3 tours in a jungle fighting for democracy to come home and be muzzled by petty tyrants in khakis. If they want a war, I know how to fight one with truth, with honor, and with everyone standing behind me. The clip went viral. A week later, I was on a morning show zooming from my kitchen in front of Gloria's old floral wallpaper. Veteran groups sent letters. Civil rights organizations offered counsel. Even a state representative reached out and asked if I'd speak at a town hall. I said yes, because this was bigger than me now. It wasn't just about a dog or a lawsuit. It was about what happens when a man stands up and refuses to sit back down. That weekend, Curtis drove past my house in silence. No slurs, no beer, no dog, just him, and the look of someone who'd just realized the storm was bigger than he thought. I didn't wave, didn't nod. But as his truck disappeared down the street, I whispered to myself the 4 words I hadn't said in a long, long time. We're just getting started. The summons came on a Thursday. Thick envelope, cream paper, embossed seal from the county court. My hands didn't shake when I opened it. I'd faced mortar-fire jungle ambushes and the eyes of a man ready to kill across a bamboo thicket. What was one more battle? Still, the reality settled in like cold fog. A hearing date, a courtroom. A judge who may have never mowed a lawn or faced the leash of a loaded insult hidden behind HOA statutes. Curtis was dragging me into a legal war, and he was betting I'd choke on the rules like barbed wire. But he forgot something fundamental. I didn't fight alone anymore. When I showed up at the coalition meeting that night, the garage was overflowing. Folding chairs turned into standing room. Marcus had built a makeshift podium from plywood and crates. On it sat a framed screenshot of the viral video of his father saluting beside my broken flagpole. "You don't just represent yourself anymore," Harold Clara said. "You represent all of us." I nodded. But deep inside, I felt the weight. Not fear, but responsibility. Not everyone had the voice. Some had jobs, kids, fear in their throats from past lives where speaking up cost them dearly. I had to carry that. Had to win. The days leading to the trial blurred with preparation. My old friend Ray Tucker flew in from Detroit Marine to the bone, now a civil rights attorney with fire in his belly and gray in his beard. He reviewed Curtis's suit, tore it apart like field rations, and built our countersuit brick by brick. He says you incited unrest, Ray scoffed. We're countering with civil harassment, HOA negligence, and racial discrimination. And we're bringing the footage. All of it. On the morning of the hearing, I dressed in my blues. I hadn't worn them in years, not since Gloria's funeral. I polished the buttons until I saw the ghost of my younger self staring back, lean, hardened eyes, full of what I hadn't yet lost. The courtroom was modest, but every seat filled. Neighbors packed the pews. Reporters scribbled in the back. Even the judge, a white-haired woman with sharp glasses and sharper tone, seemed surprised by the audience. Curtis sat with his lawyer, a man too smooth, too smug with a binder thick enough to choke a conscience. Curtis didn't look at me. He just leaned back, arms crossed, confident, until we began. Ray opened with a voice like a gavel, clear, calm, lethal. He showed the footage of the dog, the attack, the flag. Then came the citations, over 60 documents showing selective enforcement. Then the HOA audio recordings where Curtis joked about cleaning out the street and Marjorie laughed. Curtis squirmed, but it was when Clara testified that the room cracked. She stood straight, steady, and told the judge how she was fined for a swing set, but a white family on the same block had a trampoline and had never received notice. How her son was followed home by HOA patrol cars for riding a scooter. How the neighborhood changed the moment she stood with me. They weaponized the rules she said, and now they're trying to silence the only man who stood up. Then Marcus took the stand, 15 years old, shoulders straight, voice trembling but brave. I saw him bleeding, he said, and no one helped. But when we stood beside him, they came after all of us. This isn't just about a dog. This is about who gets to feel safe, who gets to belong. By the time he stepped down, the room was quiet as snowfall. Curtis's lawyer tried to spin it, tried to say my video defamed his client's character, that I rallied a mob, that I damaged Curtis's property value. Ray responded by handing the judge the petition 87 signatures from Cedar Grove residents calling for Curtis's removal from the HOA board and a citation for harassment. Then he ended with the line, I'll never forget, if property value drops every time a black veteran dares to speak truth, then maybe the property was never worth much to begin with. The judge recessed. We waited. Nervous silence in the hall. Clara held my hand. Ray paced. Marcus fiddled with his sleeves. Then the doors opened. We stood. The judge looked at us, then at Curtis. Her voice was clear. Mr. Dunbar's speech is protected. His documentation is credible. The HOA's conduct in light of evidence suggests bias and retaliatory action. The plaintiff's case is dismissed. Furthermore, the countersuit will proceed to discovery. Cheers erupted. I didn't cry. I just stood taller. Curtis stormed out, red-faced, muttering slurs that only confirmed the truth we'd already exposed. But that wasn't the real victory. That came later, when the HOA board held an emergency election, when Marjorie was voted out by a margin of 94%, when Clara was elected as the new HOA president, the first woman of color to ever hold the seat, when Mr. Lynn was appointed community inclusion officer, when the bylaws were revised openly, transparently, and our sign, Community Not Control, was etched in stone at the neighborhood's entrance. And on a cool Sunday morning, I raised a new flag. Stronger pole, brighter cloth. This time, the neighborhood stood beside me. Marcus saluted. Mr. Green clapped. And somewhere, I swear, I heard Gloria's voice. Don't let them shrink you, Harold. You are not small. No, not anymore. You would have thought the storm had passed. The ruling, the election, the new leadership on paper, everything had changed. But you can't drain poison out of a place overnight. It seeps into the soil. It lingers in whispers and glances in the silence of those who benefited from injustice and still wished things had stayed the same. And I could feel it like old shrapnel in my side when the rain came. Cedar Grove was healing, but the wound was still tender. Curtis didn't move out, not yet. He stayed holed up in that smug little ranch house with his mutt and his beer cans peeling paint on the shutters, pride bleeding from the cracks. He didn't speak to anyone, didn't wave. But his truck still prowled the street slow some nights like a wolf licking its wounds. People whispered about selling, relocating, reclaiming peace. But I knew men like him didn't go quietly. They waited. They plotted. So I stayed vigilant, but something had shifted not just in me, but in the neighborhood. It was subtle at first. Miss Patterson's birdhouse went back up painted brighter this time. Mr. Lynn's lanterns swayed freely on the wind. Marcus and the kids roller skated past my house without glancing over their shoulders. And every morning someone new joined me on my porch. Clara with muffins, Mr. Green with the paper. Sometimes even teenagers I didn't know would stop, nod, ask questions about service, about duty, about standing up when no one else does. One evening, a knock came. It was Heather Whitman, young mother. Lived 4 doors down. I barely knew her beyond a wave and a smile. She looked nervous. I just wanted to say thank you, she said. For everything. I stayed quiet before. I was afraid to speak up. I didn't want trouble. But after the court, after the flag, I just wanted to say I see you now. I see all of it. She handed me a card. Inside, a child's crayon drawing me, holding a flag surrounded by smiling stick figures of every color. I choked up, not because it was beautiful, though it was, but because silence had broken, and that's the first sound of change, the voice of someone who never believed they had one. The coalition kept working. Clara ran monthly town halls, open, honest, fierce. We rewrote bylaws, redistributed funds, and launched a new neighborhood initiative called Voices of Cedar. Every resident was invited to share their story, their struggle, their pride. One afternoon, a frail man in a wheelchair rolled up to the mic. His name was Ernie, a Korean war vet. White, soft-spoken. He looked at me as he began. When Harold moved in, I was one of those guys who nodded but never spoke. I figured stay out of the way, don't get involved. But watching him stand up, bleed, fight, and never bow. It made me ask myself what kind of neighbor I really was. I want to say, I'm sorry. And thank you. We all stood and clapped, not because Ernie was perfect, but because he was honest. And that's how you fix a place like Cedar Grove, not with force, but with truth. But even in victory, I wasn't prepared for what came next. One Sunday morning, Clara called. Curtis is leaving. I froze. Are you sure? He's packing the truck. Sold the place to a young couple from Chicago. Mixed race. He didn't even look them in the eye. I walked down the block an hour later, not to gloat, just to see. Curtis was slamming the tailgate shut. Alone. Bitter. His eyes met mine. For the first time in months he spoke. You win, old man. I looked at him for a long moment, then said, this wasn't about winning. It was about not letting fear run the place. He said nothing, just climbed into the truck and drove away. No goodbyes, no damage left to do. Later that day, the new couple arrived. They brought houseplants. They waved. The man was a school teacher, the woman a nurse. And as they unloaded their car, Marcus zipped by on his scooter and said, welcome to the neighborhood. I watched it all from my porch. Gloria's roses were blooming again, red, defiant, alive. The flag overhead fluttered strong in the breeze, and I thought, this is what it was always supposed to be. Not perfect, but possible. The real battlefield was never just the lawn. It was the fear in people's hearts, and the silence we'd learned to live with. But not anymore. Not in Cedar Grove. It rained the night before the dedication. Not a storm, but a soft, steady kind of rain, the kind that soaks the roots and whispers to the soil that healing has begun. I stood at my window, watching it blur the glow of porch lights, listening to the quiet tapping on the glass like a lullaby. Somewhere deep inside, I felt something loosening, grief, maybe, or anger. Or perhaps the memory of years spent holding my breath in a place that never truly saw me until I bled on its doorstep. The dedication ceremony wasn't my idea. That was Clara. She called it the reclamation, said it was time we didn't just respond to pain, but honored the resilience that followed. I didn't argue. I knew what she meant. We had fought the battle. Now we had to build the peace. The next morning, Cedar Grove looked like a different place. Not because the lawns were greener or the fences freshly painted, but because the people were standing side by side. Neighbors who once nodded coldly now stood with arms linked. Children who once crossed the street in fear now raced on their scooters freely. The coalition had set up chairs in the park, the one the HOA used to regulate with iron precision. Now it belonged to all of us. The new flagpole stood at the center, tall and gleaming, its base carved with the names of every coalition member living and past. Clara opened the ceremony. Her voice carried through the breeze like a hymn. We are not the same community we were, because one man refused to stay silent, because many stood beside him, because truth walked through fire and did not burn. Marcus spoke next. He wore a pressed white shirt hair neatly cut and stood with the kind of confidence that made you forget he was only 15. Mr. Dunbar taught me that being strong doesn't mean being loud. It means standing still when the world wants to push you down. The nurse from the new family spoke. The man from the bakery. The old librarian who once said nothing when injustice crept in. One by one they spoke, and each word stitched this neighborhood back together. Then they handed me the cord. The new flag. Fresh. Crisp. Red, white, and blue. I took it in my hands like I was holding Gloria's hand again for the first time. And slowly, with Marcus beside me, we raised it. As it caught the wind and flew high above the park, a hush fell over the crowd. No speeches, no applause, just the sound of wind and breath and history exhaling. I stepped back, looking up at it, not as a soldier, not even as a veteran, but as a man, a neighbor, a survivor. Later that afternoon, we walked the streets of Cedar Grove. Children drew chalk messages on the sidewalk. Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Freedom lives here. Be the voice. The HOA, now led by Clara, had shifted from rule enforcement to service. Monthly town halls replaced private meetings. Diversity was no longer a checkbox. It was a value, a commitment, a banner, not a burden. And Curtis, gone, a shadow in our past, a reminder that hate may bark, may bite, may even draw blood, but it cannot build roots in a place watered by courage. I still get mail. From veterans. From widows. From kids who read about me online and want to know what it means to stand your ground. I tell them this. It means knowing who you are when the world tells you you're less. It means fighting, even when the rules are written against you. It means planting your feet and saying, here, no farther. That night I sat on my porch. Same chair, same breeze, different world. Gloria's wind chime danced above me. its melody blending with the laughter of children playing somewhere down the block. And as I looked at the flag swaying in the moonlight, untouched, undesecrated, proud, I whispered, "We did it, love. We made them see. Cedar Grove had changed. Because a man who bled didn't back down. Because a community remembered how to speak. Because the truth once buried came roaring out. And the flag stayed flying, not just in cloth, but in us, in every neighbor who stood, in every silence that broke, in every lawn once divided now whole. And that more than anything is what I fought for, what we all must fight for. Not a perfect world, but one worth standing on the porch for, one worth defending, one where no man is small, where every name matters, where every battle, no matter how local, is a part of a greater war for dignity, for peace, and for home. In a world where silence often protects the powerful one man's voice, and his refusal to back down transformed an entire community. Black Veteran. Insulted by neighbor's vicious dog attack, community takes dramatic action isn't just a story about racism or HOA abuse. It's a story about standing your ground when everything and everyone tells you to shrink. It's about reclaiming dignity inch by inch from the jaws of prejudice. It's about the power of one veteran's truth to awaken an entire neighborhood's conscience. Because the real battlefield isn't just foreign soil. It's your street, your home, your right to exist in peace. And when one person dares to say no more, others find their courage too. Justice isn't given. It's stood for, together. If this story moved, inspired you, or made you reflect, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more powerful, real-life dramas just like this. What would you do if this happened in your neighborhood? Drop your thoughts, reactions, and stories in the comments. We read every one. And if you believe more people need to hear this story, give it a like and share with someone who needs it today, because together we don't just tell stories. We start conversations that lead to change.